Hi everybody, and welcome to the next video on arrays. In this video I simply want to show you 3 examples of programs using two-dimensional arrays, and my hope is that this will help you become more comfortable with these things. So arrays take getting used to, so I just want to show you some more examples that hopefully will get you more used to them. Here are the 3 examples that we are going to do. In the first example, you're going to get an array from a user and you're going to print the diagonal of that array. In the next program, you'll get an array from a user and then you will print the array but in reverse. So you're going to reverse each row. In the last example, we're going to take an array from a user and swap a couple of the rows. So the user will tell us which rows he or she wants swapped, and we will do the interchanging in the code. So before I do any of these, it might be helpful for you to think about how you would do these yourself, but I'm going to show you all 3 of them as we go through. So in the first example, to print a diagonal of an array, I should start by telling you what the diagonal is. It's simply the entries that are at positions that look like this. So the entry at position 0, 0, the entry at position 1, 1, etc. So the entries in the table where the row number and the column number are the same. That's the diagonal. So if this is the array that you're interested in, the diagonal is the entry at 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2, etc. So if you had more rows and columns, right, you would just keep marching your way down to 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, etc. But that's what the diagonal is. Okay, so let's write a program that lets a user give us an array and we will print the diagonal to them. So before we do this, again, you might want to think through the logic of this yourself, but essentially, what kind of things do we want to print to the screen? We want to print the entries at position 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2, etc. We want to print the entries to the screen where I equals j. So let's just set up a for loop that does that for us. So this code right here is from the previous video, and what it allows the user to do is enter an array one by one. Enter the entries one by one. And then this nested for loop here just prints the entries to the screen. So this is all from last time, but again, this nested for loop structure right here lets the user give you the entries one by one, and this nested for loop structure here prints the entries one by one. So if we want to print the entries one by one, but we don't want to print the entire table, we only want to print the diagonal entries, it seems to me the best thing to do is just set up an if statement that says, hey, if I equals j, so if the row number and column number are the same, then let's see out the entry there. Okay, so we're going to print the diagonal by saying that only if I equals j do I print anything. So let me just enter this matrix here from my example. So there are 3 rows, 4 columns, 1, 6, 4, 3, 2, 4, 4, 8, 5, 4, 3, 2. And notice what it did. It printed 1, 4, 3, which are the entries of the diagonal, right? So it basically did what we wanted, except that if you're going to print a diagonal, it makes sense to print it like this, so where the numbers are in the same position they were in before, right? So 1 is still top left, 4 is beneath and to the right of 1, and 3 is beneath and to the right of 4. So this program doesn't quite do that. So let's talk about how you can make it do that. So what does this nested for structure here do? I suppose I should have it worked, but let me just put braces here to make it clear. What happens here is you go entry by entry and you only print if I equals j. Okay? So if we want to now print so that the result looks like this, it seems that the best thing to do is let's just go one by one through the table, and if we're on the diagonal we print the entry there. So we will print 1 and we will print 4. But when we get to 6, rather than printing 6, let's just print empty space. So this matrix down here you can consider as a 3 by 4 matrix where just most of the entries are blank. So just each of these individual spaces, let's just tell the computer to put a space there. So right here it says if I equals j, print something. Otherwise, let's just tell it to print nothing. Just print a couple spaces. And then we'll put a new line in between. So again, what this nested for loop structure is doing, it's printing something, it's printing the entry at position ij if the row and column numbers are the same. If the row and column numbers aren't the same, it will just print emptiness instead of a 6 or an 8 or whatever. So let's now see what this does. So 3 by 4, 1, 6, 4, 3, 2, 4, 4, 8. Sorry, let me expand this. Oops. Okay, and then the last row is 5, 4, 3, 2. And there you go. It printed the diagonal in a way that we wanted it to print, right? The 4 is beneath and to the right of 1, and the 3 is beneath and to the right of 4. And it actually is printing stuff everywhere else. It's just blank, right? It's just printing spaces. Okay, so that's how you can print the diagonal to the screen. You just have to say, well, if I'm on the diagonal, print me, please. If I'm not on the diagonal, then instead of printing me, just print emptiness. Okay, so now let's talk about how you can get an array from a user and print the reversal of the array, if you like, to the screen. So we're going to reverse each row and print the reversal of each row. So in other words, if the user gives us this guy, we should print this guy. So each of the rows have been reversed. So before we talk about how you can print the reversal of every row, let's just talk about how you can reverse a single row. So notice that in a two-dimensional array, each row, individual row, is a one-dimensional array. Okay, so a two-dimensional array is a stack of one-dimensional arrays. So let's just first talk about, well, how would you print the reversal of a one-dimensional array? So just for example, how could you take this list and print the reversal of that? Well, we know how to do that with vectors. And there is a built-in function that will do that with arrays, but let me just point out that if all you want to do is print the reversal, then it's not so bad. So to print the reversal of 1, 2, 5, 4, 3, essentially all you have to do is just recognize what position each thing is in, and instead of printing position 1, position 0, then position 1, then position 2, etc., just start by printing position 4, position 3, position 2, etc. So instead of starting at position 0 and printing up, let's just start at the end and print down. Okay. Well, what position is the end at? Well, this is a list of size 5, and since we start counting from 0, that means that the final entry of the list is always at the size -1, which in this case is 4. So now instead of starting at 0 and printing up to 5 minus 1, let's start at 5 minus 1 and print our way down to 0. So what does that look like? So let me get rid of this. So here's what the normal print... sorry, let me put my set width guy in there. So here's what the normal printing nested for loop does, right? It just prints one by one as you go. But now though, this I is keeping track of row number, the J is keeping track of column number. When we're in an individual row, like this guy here, when we're in this row, these position numbers are keeping track of what column you are in. So like back here, this is column 0, column 1, column 2, column 3. So the number of columns is the size of each row minus 1, right? Each row has size 4, and each row has size 4. So the number of columns is 4. Therefore, the third column is the last column, because this is column 0, column 1, column 2, column 3. So let's now, in this code, instead of starting at column 0 and printing up, let's start at the end, at columns -1, and let's print our way down to the 0th entry in a given row. 0. So minus minus to print down. Okay, so now what will happen is I is 0 at the very beginning, so you're in the first row. Now the first entry we're going to print is 0, J, where J is now the end of the row. Right, J is that number. And then you decrease the J number and then you print down. So then you do J minus 1, J minus 2, etc. all the way until J is 0, which puts you over back here at the left-hand side. So let's run this and see what it does. So 3 rows, 4 columns, just the same matrix. Okay. And notice it printed what I wanted it to print. It printed the reversal of each row. So if the user gives you this, I want it to see this. And I did, right? 3, 4, 6, 1, down to 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so again, the logic of this is, well, you get the array from the user the same way you did before. This code did not change. So what changed was the way you printed to the screen. Rather than printing 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, etc., you printed 0, 3, 0, 2, 0, 1, 0, 0, and then moved on. Right, so you started by printing the last entry of every row and then going down. Okay, so that's how you can print a reversal of an array if you want to. Just you print each row backwards. Okay, so now let's move on to our last example. You want the user to enter an array and then choose a couple of numbers. And the program is going to swap those given rows. So if the user enters 1 and 3, then what should happen is the first row and third row should be swapped. Okay, so if the user gives you this array and they give you the numbers 1 and 2, that means you go to row 1 and row 2 and you should interchange them. So notice that's what's happened here, right? The old row 2 is now row 1 and the old row 1 is now row 2. So let's talk through the logic of what happens here. I mean, how would you set up, how would you create the new array with the rows swapped and then print the new array? Okay, so if you want to create a new array in which two rows have been swapped, it seems like maybe the easiest thing to do is just have a command that says, hey, replace this row with this row, and then replace this row with this row. Right? So let's just replace the first by the second and the second by the first. So what would that look like? That would look like saying, okay, this used to be a 2, now you're a 5. This used to be a 4, now you're still a 4. This used to be a 4, now you're a 3. You used to be an 8, now you're a 2. And vice versa, right? You used to be a 5, now you're a 2. You used to be a 3, now you're a 4. You used to be a 2, now you're an 8. So if you want to write code that does that, it seems like the easiest thing to do is just write a for loop that says, hey, just one by one inside of this row, replace the given entry with its corresponding entry in the other row. So just march through this list here, this one-dimensional list, replacing the individual entries by what they're supposed to be replaced with. Okay, so let's come back in here and I have I and j over here, but we already have i's and j's floating around, so let me just declare a couple of new variables. And now here, so at this point in my code, this for loop gets the array from the user. So right after we get the array from the user, we should now ask, what rows would you like to swap? And let's get those rows from them, the kth row and the rth row. And before we move on, let me just point out that this nested for loop here is going to print the array to the screen, but it's a holdover from my last example. Let me just reset it to printing the array normally. So now we're going to just print the way we should, where we just go entry by entry and build up. Okay, so between getting the numbers from the user and between printing the array to the screen, we have to now change the original array that we had so that the kth row and the rth row have been interchanged. So let me write a couple of for loops that will do that. So let's just do from 0 up to columns, okay? Because if you fix a row, like row 0 over here, right? That has size columns, right? There are 4 columns, so 1, 2, 3, 4 entries in the row. So what this for loop is going to do is it's just going to go through the kth row. So the kth row is right there, right? And each entry in that row is going to replace with the corresponding entry from the rth row. Okay, so let's just talk out loud about what this says. This says, let's just suppose R is 2, right? This is going to say myArray2 0. You are now myArray k0. So the 0th guy in this spot has been replaced with the 0th entry in the row R. And then when I becomes 1, now you have 2, 1, and that now gets placed over here in K1. Okay, 2, 3 is now K3, 2, 4 is now K4, etc. So this entire row is going to be copied onto this row. Okay, so that's what that for loop is doing. But if you want to swap the rows, you should also do it for the other one. So let's now take row R, and one by one, let's replace the entries with the entries from row K. Okay, so again, the logic here, what's going to happen is we're going to get the two row numbers from the user, and then we're going to replace row K with row R, and that's what this command is doing, as the for loop just goes entry by entry, and we're going to replace row R with row K. So the effect of this should be swapping the two rows, right? We're literally going to take, if K is 1 and R is 2, we're literally going to take the second row and put it in the first, and take the first row and put it in the second. And we should get a result of this. So let's now run this and see what happens. So down below here, I still have my my nested for loop to print the array. So let me just give the computer the same array I've been giving it. So 1, 6, 4, 3, 2, 4, 4, 8, 5, 4, 3, 2. Now I'm going to tell it I want to swap rows 1 and 2. So before I hit enter on the 2, again, what we're expecting to have happen here, I gave it this array. We're expecting to see this array because we think we've swapped rows 1 and 2. Okay, so let me come back here and hit enter, and let's see what happens. Well, it halfway worked, didn't it? I mean, it put row 2 in row 1, which was supposed to happen. But the old row 1, right, this is the old row 1, that has now disappeared. I don't see 2, 4, 4, 8 anywhere. Okay, so some of you have probably, maybe even when I wrote this, you spotted my logic error, but what does this first row, this first for loop do? It takes this row and overwrites that row. So I entered the numbers 1, 2, so K was 1 and R was 2. So this took the second row and overwrote row 1, which was reflected in what was printed. So down here, right, the old row 1 is now row 2, so that worked. But now the second for loop, what is it supposed to be doing? It's supposed to be replacing row 2 with row 1. But remember, we've already created a new row 1 right here. Right? This code forces row 1 to now be row 2. So after this for loop is over, the first row, this 2, 4, 4, 8, has already been replaced. It's been lost. And so now this for loop doesn't do anything actually, because now it just takes that 5, 4, 3, 2 and just overwrites it over itself. Okay? So in other words, what you did was you tried to do two things at once. You tried to replace row 1 and row 2 with each other, but if you do that one step at a time, you just lose that first row. So that's what's happened here. So how can you fix this? Well, it seems to me that the best way to fix this is just to create a couple of other arrays. So let's just make them row 1 and row 2. Actually, to correspond with the notation I have above, row K and row R. Let's make them the appropriate size. And now let's just make copies of the given rows before we do this stuff down here. So let's just say that row K, so up to columns, let's say that row K at a given position is my array at row K. Okay, so this is kind of confusing looking, but remember, K here is fixed. It's like a 2 or something. So when you fix that K number, you're fixing a particular row. A particular row is simply a one-dimensional array. Right? So again, just to emphasize this, if the user enters a K value of 1, if you fix that K value at 1, you're talking about this row. But this row is a one-dimensional array, right? It's just a single list. So this may look weird to you to have, like, you know, 2 parameters over here and only 1 over here, but that's why. K is just 1, or whatever the user has entered. So all you're doing is you're saying, I'm creating a copy of row K. So row K, 2, 0 is now row K 0. My array 0, 1 is now row K 1. Right, so you've created just a copy of the kth row. And same thing for row R. So I just put an R here. Row R, I just want to be a copy of the rth row inside my array. So what have I done here? I've gotten the 2 numbers from the user that tell me which rows they want to swap. I've then created copies of each row. So row K is simply a copy of the row in my array. Row R is simply a copy of the rth row in my array also. So 2 separate copies. And now down here, I can just say, okay, my array, the kth row, instead of having my array rth row, so dealing with the array itself, simply just replace it with the copy that you've created. So when you change it to this sort of style here, where you've created a copy of each row and just deal with those copies, you don't lose information. That's what was happening to us before. When we were copying rows over rows and we were dealing with the array by itself, we were losing information because we were overwriting things. If you create copies of things and store them elsewhere, you don't lose the information that you're trying to keep here. And so down here too, let's replace the rth row with the copy of the kth row that we made, which looks like this now. Okay, so again, let's just go back to this concrete example. The first code that we wrote literally said, if we entered a 1 and a 2, it said take row 2, and overwrite row 1 with it. And then after that, take row 1 and overwrite row 2. But if you do it in that order, then row 1 disappears after that first step, right? When you take this guy and overwrite row 1, now row 1 is gone. It's now 5432. And then if you take 5432 and overwrite 5432 in the other row, you haven't done anything to that other row. Okay, so when you did that first overwrite, 5432 over this row, you lost that 2448. So what I've done in the code now is made copies of each of these rows and stored them elsewhere. So I made a copy of 2448 and a copy of 5432. When you do that, you can just deal with the copies when you're doing the swapping. So what I said in the code literally was, okay, this 2448, please replace that with the copy of this other row, right? And now 5432, please replace that row with the copy of 2448 that I made. So creating these copies made it so I didn't lose any information. So again, up here, just before I run this code, these 2 for loops, those are simply creating copies of the corresponding rows. This first for loop creates a copy of row K. This next for loop creates a copy of row R. These 2 for loops here do the swapping. This literally says, hey, inside of my array, replace the kth row with the rth row copy that I made. And also, please replace the rth row with the kth row copy that I made. And now down here, we'll print the result. So let's run this and now see if it does what I think it should do. So it's 3 by 4, 1, 6, 4, 3, 2, 4, 4, 8, 5, 4, 3, 2. And I want to swap row 1 and row 2. And now see, you have 5432 here, but you don't also have 5432 there, and that's what we had last time. Now you actually get that 2448, which is what you expected. Okay, and again, the reason is because you didn't lose any information because you created copies before you started overwriting things, and you used those copies to do the overwriting. Okay. Sorry, let's just run this one more time and make sure it does it correctly for other rows. So 1, 6, 4, 3, 2, 4, 4, 8, 4, 3, 2. Let's swap row 0 and row 2. And notice it did that, right? 1643 has been moved down to the bottom, and 5432 has been moved up to the top. So this appears to work. Okay, so hopefully these 3 examples, so seeing these arrays in action more, has helped you become more comfortable with them. Yeah, I'm out of examples, right? Those are my 3. this is probably still going to be confusing to you because you haven't used these as much as I have, but also, things like this is just confusing until you do it yourself, right? This notation is confusing. Like, it's just confusing to have a row and a column position here, right? But only a single row number here, right? You have two parameters on the left and only one on the right, and this process of copying is probably confusing. So it's okay to be confused, but through the exercises that you do, you will become more comfortable with this as you go. So that's all for now.